Hello and welcome to another episode of the Empowered Hormones podcast. I'm your host, Sheridan Decker, and today I have the privilege of speaking to Nat. So Nat Kringoudis, always going to get my mouth around that, is a qualified healthcare practitioner, author, speaker, and all-round natural fertility expert. Now, Nat is someone I followed for years and was sort of probably the first person I came across in my amenorrhea journey and just struggling with not having periods for 7 years. Just being able to follow women like Nat and Lara Bryden and people in the industry who are super inspiring has just, been a big part of who I am today and why I do what I do. So thank you so much for being here, Nat. It's a pleasure to have you on.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
I feel like most people know your name, but at the same time, I'm sure there's people who are like, who is this woman? So for those who don't know you, how did you get into women's health? Where did this all start for you?
Yeah, it's a great question. I've been a health practitioner. My background is Chinese medicine, um, and I'm approaching 20 years in practice, which seems like forever. I don't even feel old enough to have done that, but I am. It turns out I'm actually more than old enough to do that. So, but I mean, look, this space is now saturated, but 20 years ago there was nobody doing it, and it wasn't by choice in the aspect of me going, oh, I need to do this because I need to support my own health or my fertility. And when I say fertility, I don't mean babies. I mean having a thriving reproductive system that is, ready to go if you want it to, and if it doesn't, well, that's okay as well. But it was literally because we had so many patients that were asking for help, and I didn't know how to help them, and they didn't have the tools, and their doctors didn't know why they were experiencing the symptoms that they were having. And so I really went on this path of trying to figure out, okay, well, what's happening for these women and why do they have these symptoms? And, whether it was heavy bleeding or period pain or ovulation pain or PMS, no one was still giving me answers at that time. Why are these women having these symptoms? And really it came down to the fact that it was a result of our modern lifestyle. And so I started treating all of that, and we got very busy very quickly because women wanted the answers and they wanted us to help them with that. So it's been a ride, a wonderful ride, but 20 years later, here we are.
It's crazy because I was just looking on your website earlier going, I wonder if Nat's actually studied in, like, I know she uses herbs and I know you as the fertility awareness or even just the fertility queen in a sense. I'm like, you have such a big name and amazing education awareness. But I was like, I wonder where it all started. And then I was like, oh, your undergrad's in Chinese medicine, because I knew you used herbs and I knew there was sort of that background and stuff. But I was like, that was sort of your introduction into the world of things.
It totally was. And it's not, it's definitely part of my training. I actually, prior to that, studied science, biosciences, and then went into Chinese medicine and then went into acupuncture. And so it's been, that was that was a whole process in itself. But I do a lot of integrative work now because I feel that's where I get the best results with patients. So I kind of use all different aspects and bring it together to really help patients get the results that, I think we want to try and create situations where women are getting sustainable long-term results.
Yeah, yeah. I
Mm.
think there's a drive, like there's obviously a drive behind you and there's a passion behind you. Like I think about the women I know in the industry who are incredible at what they do. And I think of myself and my why, and it was obviously my own health history and stuff. But for you, you've made such a big change and you've obviously pushed a lot of different platforms and tried to empower and educate in multiple different aspects, and not just as a clinician. Like it's not just your hands on teaching that you're doing it, it goes bigger than that. And was that drive for you from a personal point of view? Or is that also just because there's sheer amount of women who are coming in with these heavy, periods and PMS?
Yeah, I love that observation. It was driven by the patients initially, very much so. And then, I had this epiphany one day. I'm like, all these women are desperate to have children, because at this point in time, I really was seeing only fertility. I wasn't seeing the perimenopausal women or the girls going through puberty. I just one day I remember thinking, these women are at the point now where there's so much stress involved in their life because they are trying to get their health on track and conceive. And we're really missing a piece of the puzzle here. This actually starts with the younger generation. This starts with helping women to understand their bodies when they're younger, which isn't exactly easy, because if you think back to being a teenager, you would have loved for your period not to be in there. You would have loved to have not have had to go through all of those changes. So, I think being able to watch women over various phases and stages has really led us to where we are now. And I think we all work it out in our own time, and we're all at different parts in our path. So being able to support women wherever they're at, I think that's probably been the thing that has driven most of what we do. But all the while, I don't think you can know that without actually spending time listening to women. How else can you help them if you're not doing that? And I think that's the difference between somebody who's very smart and can read a lot and relay information, and somebody who actually has sat with tens of thousands of women and heard their stories. And so I think that has always been such a drive for me. It's one of the reasons why I'm still in clinical practice, but it's also like I love having conversations with people on social platforms, because there's just so much opportunity to help them to understand themselves better.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I had this conversation with someone earlier today, and it was that sense of my reality and your reality is almost like is different to the general female, because we have like there's information and you're informed. Like if I say to you, like, oh, you got heavy painful periods, you would say that's not normal, there's an imbalance, there's something going on, let's address it and find out what's going on. But the amount of women, and I am grassroots compared to you, but I'm still seeing women every day who are reaching out to me going, Sheridan, heavy painful periods, GP said that's normal. Similar to the whole IBS story. I've got constipation, loose stools, GP said that's normal. And, that gets my back up, because I'm like, well, that's bullshit. That is not normal. That's not how it is. And you would be the same. But I think I so often forget that 90% of women still don't know that, like, there is still so much work, quote unquote, to be done. And I feel like we've come so far in 10 years from, I think, of where I was at 17, 18 to now. But I'm like, there's still, it just seems overwhelming with the amount of women who are still struggling. It's just mind blowing.
I think that slowly but surely women are realizing that there has to be more to it. Like, hang on a minute, what is actually happening here? And also, I think it's a generational scenario as well. My mum, I remember my mum saying to me, it sucks to be a woman. I'm so sorry. Like, that was basically the answer was, well, it's just part and parcel. We got dealt those genetics. And so we get, periods and we get pain. Whereas now I think a lot more women are actually being vocal about the fact that that is common, but it's not normal. And most of the things that we see are very common. And again, it comes back to that first spark of curiosity for me, which was, these are a result of our modern day living. This is not actually normal. You're not supposed to have pain. You're not supposed to pass out from pain. You're not supposed to vomit from pain. Like, that is your body's way of saying, hello, I'm trying to let you know here that this isn't working, like something's wrong. But you're right. And the reason that we are still finding that women are told that it's normal is because these things aren't druggable. They're not a druggable problem. So if there's no drug for the problem, then how is your doctor supposed to treat that? And let's be honest, your doctor probably has 15 minutes with you at best. Their role is not necessarily all of these other things that many of us are teaching. And that's our role. And it'll be really nice when we get to a point where we're all in this together. But unfortunately, there's still not always, and it's getting better, but there is still segregation. And that is the part that I'm really passionate about, helping women to understand that medicine is very different to what you do daily to keep your health at a certain place.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, like, when you're seeing women in clinic, you're not only doing acupuncture, but then there's herbs, and then there's diet stuff, and then there's lifestyle, and there's stress, and there's just all those areas.
Yeah, it's far more what they do when they leave, not what they do when they're there.
Yeah,
You
100.
know?
Yeah. And I think that kind of comes into what I want to pick your brain on today a bit about contraception and go, well, the first knee jerk reaction is definitely the birth control pill. And we know that there's so many side effects of the birth control pill, but there's also so many other options out there as well. And I'm sure like all of them definitely have pros and cons. But if you had to pick one to start off, what would be your starting point for safe contraceptive methods?
Yeah, I mean, if I had to pick a contraception, now I think it's important to define what that is because a contraception is a barrier method hormone or fitted device. So if I had to pick one of those things, I mean, barrier methods, of course, because that's not in requiring you to have a foreign object in your body or to take hormones to control your own hormones. Then I would always be coming back to barrier methods. And I speak a lot to children, adolescents as well. And I think this is a really important message for them because they 100% should be using barrier methods for protection against STDs, which are a huge issue for long-term health. So, the fact that we are put off by barrier methods is disappointing. And how can we teach our teenagers to be responsible if we're not taking responsibility ourselves around that? So there's where I'd start. But if you said to me, all right, no, Nat, you need to actually give me a hardcore contraception, which one would we be using? Then I'm always going to go for the copper IUD because it's not actually hormonal. It's just changing the uterine environment. It has an impact of repelling sperm, but it's not without complications. It can really mess up. I see a lot of women who have thyroid issues that can't have it. It can migrate and move to other areas of the body. And it's maybe not suitable for younger women either. So, and it's just because it's quite large. The device itself is quite large. But it is an IUD and acts as such. The difference between that and the Mirena is the Mirena has hormones that it secretes. So I would be trying to avoid that if I could. But, at the end of the day, I think that actually it's such a disservice to women to not empower them to understand their body. And this is where fertility awareness becomes what I would say is the main approach and something that every woman should have the opportunity to learn what her body is communicating to her and working out and being able to actually know when she's fertile and when she's not. And it seems crazy to me that we would flatline hormones, 365 days a year when you ovulate 12 times a year. It doesn't seem logical. Like, make that make sense. Once you know when you're ovulating and when you're fertile and when you're not, I think the challenge for me, I'm probably a little bit bitter and twisted because I've been practicing fertility awareness for so long that I'm like, how can you not know? It's like so obvious. Like, I know I'm ovulating. I can tell I'm ovulating. I can see I'm ovulating. I can feel I'm ovulating. And trusting my intuition and awareness around that. And it's not woo, it's very obvious. So, I'm at probably the other end of the line with that. But I'm constantly amazed by how women aren't prepared to trust themselves. And that's because I think medicine has actually not done its job properly and not allowed us to do that. Like, and I'm not saying you shouldn't take medicine. I'm not saying that medical industry doesn't have a place, but when it comes to your fertility awareness and knowing when you are actually fertile, there's no conversation about this other than shutting it down.
Yeah, 100%. I think you're bang on there, and you're right. Yes, the other issue, I guess, that stems into that is that obviously these contraception methods with the hormones, birth control pill and stuff, are used for things beyond contraception. So we are using them for acne or painful periods or whatever it is to quote unquote regulate your hormones, which obviously is another whole topic in itself. But for fertility awareness based methods, from what I pick up, there's kind of two main ones: the symptothermal method and then the kind of calendar rhythm method. Is that correct?
I think it's important just to touch back on what you're saying. It is absolutely one thing to use contraception for contraception. It's a completely different conversation when you're using it to fix something. And that's where I'm, back to that conversation around if there's not a medicine to fix it, then what do, right? So the birth control, has been the holy grail for so long because it just shuts everything down, and then you don't have to worry about it until such a time that A, it stops working, B, you got terrible side effects. You want to actually have children. Like, there's many reasons why someone would decide to stop taking that. And these poor women have been led to believe it's fixing a problem when it's actually just masking symptoms. So I'm glad that you said that. It's really important to make that connection and awareness. Yeah, I mean, fertility awareness actually just comes down to knowing when you're fertile and when you're not. The most accurate way, and the only way that you can really dial it in with accuracy, is basal body temperature tracking. And that requires you taking your temperature every morning at the same time in the same environment. The nice thing about, there's many devices out there that actually allow you to track that now, which takes the hassle and the guesswork out of it and put some of the trust factor back into something that is, we can't call them. There are companies that actually do market their devices being a contraceptive method. Technically, it's not. And so, yeah, you've got to be really mindful about that. Doesn't mean that it doesn't help you to have the awareness to prevent pregnancy, but we can't safely call them contraception because they're not one of those things that I mentioned. But yes, so it comes down to tracking your symptoms, so your cervical fluid and the changes in your cervical fluid, the position of your cervix, as well as your basal body temperature. And the reason the basal body temperature is so nice is because you don't have to actually do much other than take your temperature. And like I said, a lot of these devices actually do it for us, which means it stores the data. It tells you when you're ovulating. You just have to put the input in.
What's your favorite one? I used to use Temp Drop, and then it cooked it on me and I haven't replaced it yet. I was just using a standard basal.
Yeah, I mean, full disclosure, I am the owner of Daisy Australia. So Daisy being one of the devices that I've had a long standing history with. I think they all can be great. The reason that I'm a fan of Daisy outside of that, truthfully, is because it's been around the longest. It's the most accurate, 99.4% accuracy of being able to pinpoint your non-fertile days, as well as being able to tell you when you ovulate. So, these devices generally take around 3 months to learn your body. And the nice thing about them is, the nice thing about Daisy, especially, is that it takes around 3 months to learn you. And it really it houses the data for you, and you can have some discrepancies. So what I'm trying to say is, if you were just to use a thermometer, and you know this because you've been doing it for a long time now, but if someone's to pick up the thermometer today, let's say, it does take a while to be able to look at the various discrepancies and look at what you've done throughout the day to see how that could adjust your temperature. For example, if you have been unwell and you've had a fever, or you've drank alcohol, or you haven't had enough sleep, or, there's lots of variables that can really shift your temperature. And if you don't know that and you haven't read it over a period of time, then that may not actually be giving you accurate information. Because these devices like Daisy learn your body, it learns the discrepancies. And sleep is another big one, because traditionally, if you're just taking your temperature and you haven't slept properly throughout the night, that reading's not going to be accurate. Daisy only requires you to have 2 to 3 hours of consecutive sleep for it to still be accurate. So that's superior in comparison to many of the other devices. And I guess that's appealing to mothers who are breastfeeding and up to children during the night. So it's not that the other devices are wrong. I just think that the difference being is Daisy's had 40 years in the game, whereas a lot of the others haven't. So the data is really solid and the algorithm's really solid, and we can have this quite, dialed in accuracy with being able to at least tell you when you're not fertile. And I think that's really important for women to understand that and see that, and then match that up with your signs that your body's giving you. So changes in cervical fluid, once you see those changes, we can line that up with what your Daisy or your device is telling you, and you can see, oh yeah, it's telling me I'm ovulating, and actually my cervical fluids change as well. So yes, I can see that I'm ovulating, and it allows the woman to really learn her body and really learn her cycle. So I do love the devices because they take the guesswork out of it. But also, if you want to learn the traditional method of temping and you want to chart, then by all means, I mean, you can still learn that as well. And I think that's fantastic.
So, two questions on Daisy then, because one, like when I've used basal body thermometers and stuff in the past, I've chucked it into the Kindara app because then obviously
Hmm.
it spits it out for me. What is Daisy? Is it a thermometer, or is it like a wrist thing like
No,
temperature?
it's not a continual monitor. So some of the ones that you're talking about is a continual monitor. Daisy doesn't need to do that. It just needs you to take your temperature before getting out of bed. It doesn't matter if it's not at the same time every day, and it doesn't matter what your sleep patterns have been, so long as you've had 2 to 3 hours of consistent sleep prior to taking your temperature. Whereas if you were just temping traditional method with a thermometer, you need to take it at the same time every day for you to get that accuracy. So just little things like that. But Daisy is the computer. I wish I had it here. It's up on my nightstand. Daisy is the computer, and Daisy actually houses the data. The app just shows it to you, which is different from a lot of the other ones as well, where the app actually, if the app dies or your data goes away and you don't have that anymore, the data is stored within the device for Daisy.
Yeah. And then does it, when you open the app, you can, I'm assuming there's a chart and you
Yeah,
can
the same
see
as
it.
all of
Yeah.
them. You can see
Amazing.
all your history of your data. And then the other thing that Daisy can do is Daisy can also tell you if you're pregnant. So if women are using it for fertility purposes, it can confirm pregnancy. It has a light system on it, and you don't actually need to log into your app to see where you're at. The device also gives you that feedback as well through a traffic light system. So that's really useful as well.
So for those who've never heard of temp tracking before, why are we using Daisy to track our temperature in the first place?
Because your temperature changes throughout the cycle. So, for the first part of your cycle, your follicular phase, so your period, and then your follicular phase where your estrogen's building, you will have you'll have a lower temperature prior to ovulation. And when we ovulate, we usually see the temperature dip and then rise higher than what it was in the follicular phase, and then it will remain high for the second part of the cycle. So if you're consistently tracking that, you start to see, yep, okay, I've got consistently lower temps in the first part of the cycle. I see a dip in my temperature, I see a rise in my temperature, and then consistently higher temperatures in the second part of the cycle. And then we get our period and we repeat the process. So these temperature shifts are really useful, and they allow us to see a lot of information as to what our hormones are actually doing if you want to go down that rabbit hole. But for the everyday person, just to have the peace of mind of looking at a temperature, getting that feedback, and being able to see in the scheme of things where you are in your cycle and if you've ovulated yet is pretty useful, because obviously you have to ovulate to fall pregnant. So if you haven't ovulated, you can figure that out. Daisy will be able to tell you when that happens, and it'll look at your fertile window and tell you, when you're outside of that and when you're inside of that, so that you can time sex appropriately. And for those that want to follow fertility awareness to avoid pregnancy, well, obviously you can't fall pregnant if you're not ovulating. So you can do the math, really.
Yeah. I love that because I see so many Dutch tests on, sort of day to
Hmm.
day basis of women who are struggling with having adequate progesterone levels. And obviously, there's an adrenal component, there's always a gut component, and da 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 da. But they're kind of going, well, a young woman I saw this week would have been mid-20s, no estrogen, no progesterone, still having a bleed. And I'm like, kind of looks like anovulatory cycles. Are you tracking temp and things? And she's
Hmm.
gone, oh, no. But I'm like, if you had that data, you would be able to sort of confirm that ovulation and see what's going on so much more.
Absolutely. And I think it's not just a matter for me. I'm at an age where it's not just about me knowing I can track my cycle without. I don't need the data tracker.
Yeah.
Like I'm good. But I think it's great information for my daughter to have to one day look back on as well, and teach her. So, I know my mum says this to me all the time. She lost her mum when she was 30 years old. And she's like, I got no idea what happened to my mum's cycles. I've got no idea about when she started going through or showing signs of menopause or what that looked like for her. So I know we're not here to talk about menopause, but really looking at the longevity of our health as women, I think is very important for the next generation to pass that information on as well.
I guess also if there's discrepancies in your temp or your cycle length has changed and stuff as well, you can reflect back on that month and go, what's happened? What changes? What additional stress was there? What happened with my diet? Or have I been exercising too much? Or like it would just give you that confirmation or even reassessment and go, hey, wait a second, I ovulated later, or my period's coming later. What the heck
Yeah.
am I doing with myself the last
Mhm.
30
Mhm.
days?
Yeah, 100%. And being able to look back and know that. And I can't tell you the number of women that'll say, "Oh my gosh, Nat, I don't know what happened, but I had the worst cycle." And I'll be like, "Well, what have you been doing?"
Yeah.
We still don't connect the dots. We still don't go, "Oh yeah, that's right. I traveled. I drank things I wouldn't ordinarily drink in copious amounts. I ate a whole lot of sugar, or I've had a horrible month at work, or whatever it might be." Is absolutely reflected in all of these things. And so being able to connect the dots is super important, because otherwise why wouldn't you think something's wrong if it's out of the ordinary, you know?
Yeah, and it comes back to that thing that we talked about at the start, that empowerment of women. And you're going, well, look, you can start to connect with your body, understand what's going on. You have more data, and you can start to sort of, I guess, not only support yourself but support your health moving forward as well. You're no longer relying on your GP's prescription or some other sort of method or some synthetic hormones to empower you, educate you, do these things. You
Mhm.
actually start to come in tune with your body. And I feel like that then connects to gut health and everything else as well, because you start the amount of women who are asked, "Are you having a regular bowel movement?" They're kind of like, I don't know, when did I poo last? And I'm like, how do
Mm.
you not know that? Like, I'm
Yeah.
so switched on to what my body is doing because I've had to. But we disconnect. We
Mm.
don't connect these things together. It's crazy.
Yeah. It is unfortunate. I think it's actually part of the part of the reason women have disconnected is purely because of birth control. It's flatlined their hormones. And just for those that are listening who might be on birth control, you don't get these temperature shifts when you're on birth control because you're not ovulating. So, and therefore you're not actually getting a period. You're just getting a withdrawal bleed. And a lot of women are very shocked to learn that. So this wouldn't necessarily, well, not necessarily, this would not work if that was the case for you. And a lot of women who even have a marina, they will actually find that they stop having periods as well. So it just depends on the person as to how that goes. But it is important to understand that you're not getting these shifts and these ebbs and flows. And so it does make it hard to understand your body, because it actually changes, because it changes our hormones. It actually changes everything about us. It changes our outlook on life. It changes the decisions that we make. Like, our hormones allow us to have various ebbs and flows that influence how we behave. Now, if you're not having that influence, it's kind of like just a rinse and repeat scenario, kind of like a man, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But a male has a 24-hour cycle, and it's kind of like, wake, eat, work,
Yeah.
sleep, repeat. And when we're on birth control, we're not getting the ebbs and flows of our hormones. So it's a very much a similar cycle to that. So if that is you, don't worry too much about the fact that you're like, what are they talking about? But it is important for you to have that information.
But then also, like, there's that information side of things, but the importance of ovulation as well, right? Like, maybe you can touch on that just briefly about it's not just about falling pregnant as well. Like, yes, we can track for pregnancy, but we're also, like you said earlier, tracking for going, have I ovulated? This is really important. My body needs to ovulate each cycle.
Yeah, I mean, ovulation really is the start of the cycle, not the period. The period is the clean out that happens if you don't conceive, but you can't get a period without ovulating. So, that comes back to ovulation being the most important event of your menstrual cycle. And the other reason that it's important is because it shows us that your hormones are doing what they're supposed to be doing, and you are releasing an egg for conception. Basically, your body is a pregnancy machine. It's trying to set you up to fall pregnant no matter what. And even though you might not like to hear that as a listener, that's pretty much what it's doing. And for the person that's listening and saying, oh, well, I don't get a period, so that's not happening. Well, actually, it is, because it will always search for an optimal environment. So if the environment's not optimal, then you may not ovulate, or you may not ovulate regularly. And that's because your body is actually going, this is not an optimal environment for pregnancy to occur. So it's still a pregnancy machine. It's still trying to scope out the best time for that to happen. The interesting thing about ovulation is, it's not the same day every month. It can change due to the circumstances in the environment that you're in, and it should be, because again, it's looking for an optimal scenario for fertility and pregnancy to occur. And the nice thing about that is you get to decide whether or not you want to make a baby at that point or not. That's up to you at this point in time. But I think a lot of us are petrified of our fertility. We're so worried about falling pregnant. And the majority of women will find out it's probably not as easy as they thought it was going to be when they do decide to start trying for a baby. So I think this is another reason why watching your ovulation many years prior to wanting to have children means that there's no stress involved from that side of things when it is time to conceive, because you've already figured out what your cycle's doing. You already understand and have cycle awareness. So it just means now you're hitting go on something that you've been planning for a long time.
Yeah, you're right. And we know sort of after that ovulation, we get that nice progesterone surge and our hormones obviously shift and change. But as you would see coming into your clinic of women's with a lot of symptoms, there's so often, even if they haven't been on contraception and they are having regular cycles, there can still be that real shift of higher estrogen or even just really low progesterone, which can obviously drive so many symptoms. So without regular ovulation, without a nice strong ovulation, and you're not getting that progesterone surge, we just start to see all these negative side effects as well, which is no fun.
Yeah, I think what's interesting about that is from a medical perspective, we look at that and go, oh, your progesterone is falling short. So, if you were tempering, you would be able to see this, because progesterone is that hormone that's warming, which is why our temperature actually rises. If, for example, you've got a 28-day cycle, but your temperature starts to come down as of day 25, you'll actually feel that in terms of PMS symptoms. Whereas this is why some people have PMS and others don't. It's what are their hormones doing? So when progesterone starts to taper off, you might have a headache, you might feel moody, you might be very tired, you might have some other pain. There's lots of symptoms that come with premenstrual hormone changes, what we call them PMS. But our Western mind goes, oh, your progesterone's falling too short. Let's give you some progesterone. And for the majority of women, that doesn't fix the problem. Well, it might solve maybe 2 or 3 of those symptoms, but it doesn't fix the underlying problem, because progesterone is probably just following what the other hormones are doing. So we need to look at the bigger picture. We need to look at the whole picture when it comes to our progesterone levels, and actually not just talk to the progesterone, but talk to how can we regulate our hormones throughout the entire cycle, so that by the time it gets to the end of the line, by the time it gets to day 25, 26, 27, that we can keep your progesterone up and you'll have less symptoms in that window.
And I think that just circles back to exactly where you started about the things that impact these hormonal balances. And then if there's, poor diet for a month or couple months or years, the poor diet, the lifestyle, the stress, all those kinds of things are just impacting, quote unquote, how much progesterone we're making each month and how that balance of estrogen to progesterone is. And then I guess that whole adrenal output as well, and going, well, what's our cortisol doing and how's that impacting those beautiful sex hormones as well?
Yeah, exactly.
It's empowering. It's good. Like, I just feel like we switch off, we get caught up in the go of each day. And I just think like that's why having things like Daisy on hand are going to be so good, which I'll definitely link into the show notes. But you also have courses, or you have other resources, or you have things that women who might be hearing this for the first time and going, that is either mind-blowing, because if you haven't heard about it before, it is ridiculously cool. And then the other side of things, the women go, I had some idea, I knew birth control wasn't amazing, like the birth control pill, there are other methods, but they want to learn more. Do you have resources available for those people?
Yeah, absolutely. NatKringoudis.com is where you'll find pretty much everything. I've been, sharing on there for many, many, many years. So if you have a symptom or you're curious about something, please use the search bar there. But you'll also see that there's lots of masterclasses that we have created, and we also have a membership which houses all the masterclasses, which is an amazing place for women to come and learn about their bodies and have the support and questions answered that they need. So all roads lead to Rome for me. It's all Nat Kringoudis, whether it's Instagram, my website, and then of course, supporting women in clinic as well is something that we still do as an option. But I really want to empower women to at least have the foundational understanding of their hormones, and then where that takes us beyond that depends on the person.
Yeah, totally. And then my last question is, how did you come up with Daisy, which is such a lovely name?
Oh,
But
it's not out. I mean, Daisy, like I said, is around 40 years old. So Daisy is origins are in Europe, where Daisy is very, very well known. It's just that we live in the furthest part of the world, don't we? And things take so much longer to get here. So Daisy, like I said, it's existed for 40 years, and it was actually created by somebody who wanted their wife to understand her cycle better without needing to be regulated in any other way. So it wasn't actually designed for fertility purposes initially. It was more about understanding, the cycle and not having to rely on outside resources. So it was designed by people in technology. And now it's like 40 years later, like I said, it's evolved over time. The device didn't look like Daisy does now. Daisy's the evolution of
I'm looking at it now, and it's nice. It looks so
yeah,
smooth and
yeah,
lovely.
I know. It's great. So it's an awesome device. And like I said, it's been around for 40 years. So it's not my technology, but I'm privileged enough to be able to be the person in Australia, or co-own it with somebody else, that we are able to distribute and educate fertility awareness because of Daisy.
Amazing, amazing. Well, thank you so much for jumping on today. It's honestly just, been a privilege for me to be able to pick your brain, and I'm excited to get this podcast episode up. And I am going to buy Daisy and give it a whirl because, temp
Awesome.
died ages ago, and I need something. So this has been the perfect kick up the butt for me.
There you go. Awesome. Thanks, Sheridan.
So, yes, lovely. I will link everything into the show notes. So, for those listening, you'll be able to find all those roads to Nat. And thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Awesome. Thank you again.